How's everybody doing? Good. Response, we're still recovering from the heavy lunch. So my name is Jesse Kreye. I'm an assistant research professor in fire and natural resources down at Penn State University. I've been at Penn State for living there 2 years, in my position a year and a half. I grew up in Minnesota. The bulk of my research comes from California and Florida. More often I'll wear gator blue, orange than I will Penn State Nittany Lions. I'm coming around. I like Penn State hockey stuff. But it's part of my position. I do a lot of research. I do some teaching, but I also have an extension role, being at a land grant. And so, when I'm thinking about developing an extension program specifically in fire, my audience or stakeholders, I think, are kind of largely two categories. Managers, such as many of you in this audience, as well as private landowners. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to start looking at was getting an idea of the interest, particularly prescribed burning, by private forest landowners in the state of Pennsylvania. I should say, sorry, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, until I've been there long enough. So, a lot of my research, I'm really a fire scientist and fire ecologist, usually studying fire behavior or fire effects. But it really, I needed some expertise to help me out if I was going to actually study people. Okay? So I went into forestry because I'd rather look at a tree than talk to a person, right? And I've had to overcome that over the years. Fortunately, I was able to rope in Jesse Kreye. She's also a professor in our same department. She does a lot of non-market economics and social science work. So I was able to bring in her expertise to help me out to make a survey something way more than I would have probably been able to do. And she was allowed me to be able to actually look at the economic demand for prescribed burning on private land. Okay, so we start to think about a market being there for burning. And she has a PhD student, Arun Reshmi, that she brought up from Mississippi State, who's largely doing a lot of analysis of this work. And so a lot of the data I'm going to kind of discuss, we're just preliminarily doing the modeling, but I think we have some pretty interesting results up to now. It's not by chance that we share the same last name, Melissa and I. And we also share a mortgage and a 7-year-old Raleigh. So, for those of you who don't know, in Pennsylvania they passed the Prescribed Burn Act, about 10 years ago. Basically, recognizing the benefits of burning and supporting the ability for folks to get fire on the ground in the Commonwealth, right? Okay, so provide some liability protection as long as burns are conducted under the set standards, right? Okay. So aiming to have a prescribed burn plan filed with the DCNR, and we have DCNR represented here today, but also burning under qualification standards. And for Pennsylvania, that's basically the NWCG standards. Okay, so thinking about who can really get fire on the ground in the Commonwealth, it's primarily the state agencies such as DCNR, the Game Commission. They're trying to get a lot of their folks trained over the last 10 years to try and increase acres and get fire on their own property. The TNCs do a little bit of burning. They come over and help burn a little bit of grass on our arboretum across the street from us. That gives us a little bit of nice press on burning around State College. There's very little activity as far as consultants in Pennsylvania, okay? So in thinking about private lands, there are some significant challenges because of standards on the one hand, being such that there really limits private landowners from being able to burn on their own properties, right? And then there's a significant capacity problem in the sense that there's not really much for consultants out there trying to meet the demand of this market if there is one, okay? And so that really piqued my interest to look at what that market might actually be, okay? And so thinking about how we could use extension to try and focus on how to develop strategic communications and how we can try and move forward to help get more burning done on private lands in the Commonwealth. Okay. So I know it's not like Florida where I came from, where million acres being burned a year, and it's basically your constitutional right to be able to burn the property. So, 70% of forest lands in the Commonwealth are privately owned. A lot of private landowners. Now, most of that, the over 700,000 landowners, a lot of that's, the really small parcels, right? There's some, a few really large landowners. There's some hunt clubs that have over 20,000 acres. Okay, so there's a lot of variability. But really, again, there's not much burning going on private lands at this time. Okay. So you're interested in what's the demand, and I was really stoked that we could try and put some dollar values to this, but also getting at a lot of other kind of information that would be useful for us, based on kind of what the private landowners' perceptions are when it comes to risk and trust and their knowledge around prescribed burning. Okay. So we developed a survey, using this choice experiment method that Melissa uses a lot. She's done a lot of work in the Southeast, looking at non-market economic stuff with private lands management, and looking at a lot of various benefits such as water quality, wildlife, as well as timber. And she uses this choice experiment that I'll talk about that helps us try and look at what that economic demand might be. Okay? We want to assess generally what's the knowledge of prescribed fire private landowners. Okay? Assess their perception of risks that are associated with it. Do they think prescribed burning is a really risky venture or not? Okay? Do they have trust in the professionals that are putting fire on the ground right now? Okay? It's kind of basic good information. Then that choice experiment is essentially what we do is we create this willingness to pay study where you have several different programs that you present to the survey respondent. Okay? In this case, there would be 16 different programs that you would present. And within those 16 programs, they would have various attributes associated with those programs. Okay? If you can see within these 5 categories, okay, ecological outcomes, management benefits, resources for landowners, reduction in barriers, and then of course the cost, you essentially have at least one of those attributes from each of those groups into a program. And you essentially ask them what their willingness is to pay or enroll in a program to be able to burn on the property, if that makes sense, okay? So a good example may be, here's a program that would cost you, $50 per acre, provide some training to the landowner potentially. To burn, the primary benefit of burning would be to improve wildlife habitat, okay, control invasive shrub species, and there would be some kind of reduction in barriers as well, such as maybe relaxing the standards or reducing liability, okay? Some of these, you develop these different scenarios. Some of them really make sense, to a professional. Others may be like, well, this one doesn't quite make sense. But you can use that to get at how these attributes are influencing the demand too. So it's not just, here's how many people are interested in burning, and here's kind of the average of what they're willing to pay, but what are the factors that are driving their willingness to pay, and how can we benefit from that in extension or in the other professional world to be able to meet that through strategic communications, education, and things of that nature. Okay? So in general, who responded? And there's a bunch of attributes here of the respondents themselves. They're primarily mostly men, fairly well educated, generally well off. Okay, almost 2/3 of that annual income of over 80,000 a year. Okay, about a third of them own over 200 acres, and almost 2/3 own over 100 acres. Okay, so many of them have, some amount of land. Very few of them use burning before, okay, but there was a few. I think largely these are folks that were actually professionals that also own land. They may be working for the agencies, DCR and Game Commission. Okay, that's I think largely where those folks have some experience. And that's a good, overall general representation based on some of the other surveys of private forest landowners in the state. Okay. Their priorities, this is based on their results. Enhance wildlife populations, Okay, recreational activities, including hunting, timber production to some extent, aesthetics and seclusion. Okay, so trying to gauge, what are the priorities for actually doing some management on the property. Okay, and then what management activities are they actually, engaged in at the moment. Okay, those that stood out: controlling invasives, thinning for stand improvement, habitat management, some timber sale, and then recreation management, maintaining trails, in their backwoods so they can, walk through and things of that. So it gives us a sense of kind of who they are. So to throw the numbers on it, okay, when we categorize these programs, we essentially had a range from $20 to $200 an acre, okay, based on some focus group and talking to a lot of folks in the state about how this might look in lands down there. And you can see that it makes sense that as the cost increases, the willingness of the survey respondents to enroll or essentially have their property burned decreases, right? That makes sense. What they make costs more or less likely to do it. It's maybe hard to see because of the black text, but still, I mean, $20 an acre, which is pretty low. Over 60% of our respondents said that they were willing to enroll. Okay, so I was really curious based on the fact that a lot of folks didn't really know what private landowners really knew about prescribed burning in Pennsylvania. Okay, agencies were doing it. They were doing some outreach, some education, some media about what's happening. They really didn't know what kind of private landowners knew about it, what their interest was. So this is a pretty significant interest, right? Now that declines as you increase in cost. Maybe 32% of landowners are willing to pay $200 an acre to have fire burn on their property. Okay, so we're showing some significant demand out there. Okay, so we looked at what demographics are kind of related to value of prescribed fire, which just means their willingness to pay. Okay, so what's correlated with willingness to pay? Okay, larger landowners were willing to pay more per acre in general. Okay, younger landowners were willing to pay more and wealthier, which makes sense. And something that was strongly associated is those that were already involved in some kind of landowner assistance program already. And it makes some sense there. Okay. When we looked at their trust, it was pretty high trust in professionals. So this is trust in professionals that are putting fire on the ground. 3/4 of them had high trust in those that are putting fire on the ground. That's a good thing, right? Okay. And when we look at how trust impacts value, we actually look at how their range of trust impacts their willingness to pay. These are the kinds of things down here that Melissa can do with the fancy modeling she does. She can actually put some dollars to this, right? If we were to be able to bump up trust significantly, it could increase willingness to pay by like $15 an acre. So now you can start to think about how you could target strategic communications to private landowners to bump up their willingness to enroll in programs and pay for prescribed burning. So that's really cool. We're starting to dig more into some of these nuances and then thinking about what's important and what's not. And already there's a pretty high trust, okay? There may be a little bit of room to try and improve some trust, but at least of the landowners that we were sampling, and we got almost a 40%, actually over 40% response rate out of over 600 mail surveys, which was really good, and we did some web surveys as well. So we had some pretty significant response that we were happy with, okay? So they're trusting, they feel their risk is pretty low, okay? So 67% perceived risk of prescribed burning as being low, okay? So there's not a lot of folks that really think that it's high risk. So that seems positive, right? Okay? And we could put some numbers on that. If you could reduce, their perception of risk, that could increase their willingness to pay about $7 an acre. Knowledge and value. Hey, here's where they lacked significant knowledge in prescribed fire. Okay, so we asked a variety of questions, kind of ranging from have you heard of prescribed fire to some questions related to what they knew about prescribed fire, all the way up to they have experience and they're a qualified burn boss, right? Okay. So most respondents, had heard about fire. Almost all of them had heard about fire, but their knowledge level of prescribed fire was fairly low. But interesting, knowledge and experience was not correlated with their willingness to pay, okay? Maybe surprising, I don't know, it just means that people that don't really know that much about it, there's still a demand. They still want fire on their property, right? They still think that fire may be a tool that they would like to utilize to meet their management objectives. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, so looking at the array of those program attributes and how they're influencing willingness to pay, we really only had a few that really stood out, okay? So on the top, program attributes that they valued most, essentially would increase their willingness to pay, was opportunity to apply for financial assistance. Okay, that kind of makes sense, right? Okay, if there's a way for you to try and get money to help you do this, you're more willing to enroll and likely to kick in some of your own money to do it. Okay, and then one of the benefits that stood out was burning to maintain forest health, resilience, and diversity. Okay. Program attributes that actually lowered willingness to pay, and this is the stuff that initially it was hard for me to wrap my head around until Melissa really was describing a lot of this stuff because she does a lot of social science research with people. So being in a burn association and getting training specifically for landowners lowered their willingness to pay. And I was like, that's kind of a bummer. Like if you give them training, they're less likely. We tried to explain, at least, we assumed that most folks would not know what a burn association was, but we have some language there that basically describes kind of what that is. And Melissa thinks, and based on some of her other, research, that these factors are all empower landowners to burn themselves. So this might be an indication that landowners in general, right? There's a lot of variability in our data set that we're trying to work through. In general, I think they're interested in having professionals come and burn their property. They're not really that interested, potentially, of them doing it themselves. And you look at some of the demographics, some of the age, brackets in the demographics, it might be a challenge for some of those people to do it themselves, even if they wanted to. So that might be kind of what's going on. And it's not that it means it's a negative willingness to pay, but compared to all those other attributes, okay, it actually, lowers that value. And I think that makes some sense that people maybe are hesitant to want to do it themselves, where they're more likely if they were to have a consultant or assistance from the state with folks that are qualified to burn, they may be more in that mindset at this stage in Pennsylvania. Okay. And a lot of those other attributes, those benefits, and when we look at them overall, okay, enhancing wildlife, oak regeneration, like I was interested in seeing, well, which of these kind of benefits are going to really pop out? Because then we can really focus communication on this stuff. Is it oak regen? Is it wildlife enhancement? Is it reducing ticks? One of the reasons I came up here is Mike Gallagher is going to present some of our work in the next session that we're doing on the Jersey pine bear and the fire and ticks. And that seems like kind of a really easy one to use to try and entice people to burn. I think there's just a lot of variability, right? Okay, people would be interested in a lot of different benefits. We know that fire can provide many of these benefits, okay? So I don't think there's one particular benefit that landowners are showing dominates over anything else. The other thing that's interesting is when I first look at this, like confidence. So we also asked them in the willingness to pay study, what's your confidence level in what you're putting down, okay? And that was negatively related to willingness to pay. That's kind of weird. I think if you're more confident, more. Melissa pointed out very quickly, because she does a lot of this stuff. She goes, in general, you probably get this anecdotally, but even in some research, like the people who are really, really against something are really confident in that they're really, really against something. Yeah. Okay? And I put age on here too, because age is another factor that reduced willingness to pay. We don't really know, necessarily where that is, but there may be older folks that have not really, you know, grew up in a time where there hadn't been a lot of fire going on, right? They may be kind of set in their ways in the sense that they see fire as bad and something they really want to do. Okay, we did get a couple, we kind of saved some of these specific comments from some of the surveys. There's always a couple you want to save, and there were a couple in there that were pretty demeaning and writing in the margins about why in the heck would you be doing this, and here's why you're an idiot, and da-da-da-da-da, right? And so I think that makes some sense. Then it's also of interest that people that are interested in burning, you know, and it doesn't mean that the people that are interested in burning aren't confident at all, but they're just less confident, right? But there's a lot of room for education on that aspect about burning. And burning really hasn't been happening that much in Pennsylvania. They're ramping up. I mean, the numbers are going this way, but they really haven't been, you know, doing it for more than 10 years. And so there's a lot of room there. I'm hoping that us and Extension can kind of play a role in being able to foster, get more fire on the ground in private lands, however that might look, increasing capacity through, you know, helping with training. Or if we do want to sit at the table and discuss the standards and whether or not different standards could work based on maybe, you know, some certain fuel types or something that might be appropriate, that might increase that. But overall, I was really excited to see that there generally seems to be, you know, pretty large demand, okay? Most of them don't see it as really risky. They have high trust in you all that are putting fire on the ground. So I think that's some real benefits and some real positive lights for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions, I'll take them.
Just curious, you're using a pretty high standard saying burning NWCG 12. I'm just curious if that's like kind of fire danger, like a class day, or could fire departments potentially burn for training purposes on private land on request?
It could, so there's nothing, hopefully I'm getting your question. There's nothing to preclude fire in private lands. The law doesn't preclude that. But even if they were to conduct some training, you would still need to have the required qualified personnel on the burn, right? Okay. And so you may have, you know, whatever, you have the RX2 boss, and then you have an RX2 trainee, and you have an ignition boss and an ignition boss trainee. And you know, when I first got to Pennsylvania, went on a game commission burn, especially after being in Florida for 8 years. Although I started my career for 10 years in California, worked for the Forest Service, which is a little different mindset. But I couldn't find a place to park because it looked like the entire game commission was on this burn. And it was a big burn. But I learned quickly too that they were trying to get a lot of their folks trained on these burns because they're trying to really increase their capacity. Game Commission has a program, and correct me, I don't know if the DCNR has anything, but Game Commission, if you have some habitat agreements with the Game Commission that they can burn on your property, okay? Or if you have adjacent lands to the Game Commission, they'll burn on their property. But they're trying to get their own acres burned, right? And they have their own challenges with capacity. So I don't know if that answers your question. You still have to have, based on the complexity of the burn, you would still.
You don't have a lot of volunteer fire departments.
Yeah. Right. And that's one of the avenues kind of thought about is there potential there or not? And I think
that way they get something free.
Yeah.
The fire department using training. That sounds like a legislation.
Yeah. And I think agencies, there's a variety of opinions on how this all looks too, and I'm trying to figure that part out very carefully.
Quick question. Based on the survey results you showed, it seemed like assistance programs, if you put some monetary support to the assistance program so that landowners could hire professionals, that would be the better and more productive way to go in getting fire on the landscape for some of those landowners.
Yeah, so basically the question and comment was about, you know, assistance program seems to really stand out as you know, something that's going to work. And so I think that, I agree, that seems like kind of a no-brainer to start off, you know. If there's monies to support, and these, you stuff like this, you know, the hope is like these demand surveys, if you have dollars to it, you can present these then to decision makers and legislators. They love to talk about dollars, right? What does this mean? If we increase burning by X number of acres, like what is that? $4 or $6 million market in Pennsylvania. And so I think having those incentive programs and investing in that, but also needs to be the capacity, because it'd be great if we had a lot more, you know, qualified consultants
That's right.
in Pennsylvania that could be able to do it. Because even if they have the money, they can't get someone to come out and burn, or they're sitting on a docket for, you know, several years before they can actually get fire in the ground. So I think a mix of those two are kind of some of the early incentives.
Mike from New Brunswick, what about liability insurance and availability of companies that are willing to support that?
Right, and I can't, that might be a better question for someone who's like Joel in here that know more about, because I don't know that much about what's currently going on with the insurance. You know, I've had, you know, consultants, you know, contact me and say, man, even if I like to do this, there's no way I would add insurance because they couldn't afford it, right? And trying to look in, like, thinking about the insurance standpoint, like there's such a minute, if you look nationwide of the actual legal cases where there's been, you know, a suit where someone's been deemed liable, those are very, you know, there's very few of those. And so I don't know how insurance companies are looking at that stuff. I think it seems very risky to many people. You start to dig into the numbers, like A, how many escapes there are, it's very small, right? B, how many escapes cause some kind of damage. If there wasn't negligence, right? Or God forbid, gross negligence, right? And those things are kind of outliers that come out too, that, you know, if you burn and you were negligent, I mean, your insurance company, I would assume, you back up and say, well, we're not responsible for cutting the check too. But I can't speak real specific to that.
I was wondering how this survey compares to Erica Smithwick's work, and obviously you had different audiences, but in her work, she was seeing the control of ticks being one of everybody's favorite reasons to burn, and I saw that you had that in there, but it didn't seem to rise to the top.
Right, and I was, based on the fact that we're investing research money into this, I was certainly hoping this was going to be, and I think it still can be. So Erica Smithwick, who's also Penn State, she did some work in Pennsylvania and New Jersey geared towards all managers, right? And then she also did some public perception stuff, right? And she's shown that, you know, tick reduction was a benefit that folks were really interested in. I can't remember, do you remember if that was primarily from the manager's standpoint
I
or
think
from?
that was public perception.
Okay.
Yeah.
Part of that might be the location. That may be the case, that Jersey maybe is, you know, it's heard that more. I don't know that there's a lot of that information being discussed. I'm having a little bit of media coming out now that's bringing up ticks, and I'm getting calls about that. I also had someone write me and goes, you know, a study shows that when you burn, it just increased ticks, so you should not be saying that, right? And so I think I'm trying to figure out what information is out there and how we can support that. And I think that ticks, you know, that ought to be one that ought to really resonate with people. And it may just also be that we asked about so many of these other benefits that one didn't really stand out so much more than the other. But we're trying to nuance that look. Well, let's look at small landowners that ticks be more prevalent. Because when we've done a little bit of subset analysis with these DDX, we're still fluent, we found tick reduction to be significant in certain situations. I think it's in the smaller landowner set. So,
has there been any effort to do outreach with foresters when they're doing forest management plans for the landowners? Because that's like a hurdle of writing up the forest management plan. The foresters aren't recommending the ecology what forests do.
yeah, and so personally, as an extension, I haven't been doing anything yet with like our service foresters and DCNR. I've been talking to some, but that could be another avenue of extension educating. Well, where you're trying to get information to those professionals that can network it out to landowners, right? And speaking directly to the managers that work, you know, with private landowners on forest management plans, that might be. And I really don't know the gauge yet. I'm starting to interact more with Scrap Park Council and some of the agencies that are aware that some of our service foresters are on the idea of burning. But does that get at your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have some fairly valuable hardwood stands in Pennsylvania. Was there any apprehension on the part of the landowners that burning might impact the value of your trees?
So anecdotally, with some of the comments, there was some of that. Okay, the people are you know, they're worried about the impact to some of their mature trees, right? And then also kind of the discussion of, you know, for folks that are doing active timber management for production, like whether or not a mill is going to take, you know, a butt log that has char on it or not. There's a lot of kind of debates on whether that's, you know, an issue or not. Obviously, it's pulp and it's a serious issue, and so I think there's some of that, but it didn't resonate across and stand out as a whole. But some of our comments certainly was, you're going to kill all. You know, I have valuable timber, and they assume that your burn's going to be, you know, some kind of stand replacing event, right? So.
I'm curious, with the large fires that Pennsylvania had a few years ago, multi-thousand acre fires, has that got the public thinking a little bit more about fuel loads, and does that reflected at all in your survey? Is anybody concerned about reducing fuel and the impact of a fire on their property?
Not so much. We're still digging into that. But specifically to the fires, you know, that had occurred, I think I haven't been here long enough to really gauge that. Some others that may be here may be able to kind of trip. We didn't put anything specifically in the survey that might tease that out, although we have some about fuel reduction in there. So we're trying to still go through some of the comments, pick out some of those. I don't think we're going to come up with anything that's specific. But I think those things matter, right? And then if you use that, you know, if that kind of stuff happens, then how do you capitalize on that, you know, to be able to educate or speak to the public, either to the media or not, when there's a wildfire, right? It's like, oh, there's a huge wildfire, why are you burning? Here's, you know, of the many reasons we burn, like fire hazard mitigation,